Troy Letters, welcome to the Wrestling Changed My Life podcast.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Man, I'm so excited for this. You're a name that I've heard for years, and people always say, you got to get so and so on. You are right up there, my brother. So I am thrilled to have you on today. And I was just looking through your career, man. You've hit on so many different pockets of wrestling over the years. I did not realize that you used to coach at Penn State with Cael and those guys.
Yeah, I was actually on board when Troy Sutherland was there. It was my first season there. It was him, Hughes, Dernlin, Onspach, and then Hughes went to Lehigh. Cael, they let Troy Sutherland go, and it was kind of a rumor of who was. We heard Rob Cole, we heard Kerry McCoy, we heard Pat Santoro. Cael's name didn't come up till the very end, and I'm sitting in my living room with my wife who's pregnant, and my phone's ringing, and she's like, "Troy," I'm like, "Who is it?" She said, "Cael Sanderson." I pick up the phone, and
Let's go.
yeah, let's
So
go.
what do you so you're there a year. Were you expecting Coach Sutherland to move on?
No, I had no idea. It happened. I was there just for one season, and then right after the season, it was announced.
So what did Cael say when he called you?
He said, "Tell me about Penn State's team," and he was up on a visit and toured the facility, and that him and some of the boys were coming up. So we started talking about the team and just the environment overall at Penn State.
And had you been out to Iowa State as a recruit?
Yeah. So actually, Cael was my host. So I went to Iowa State, and it was a great class out there. And Cael was my host. I stayed with Cael, and that's when I first got to know him. And then later on, out in Colorado Springs, the year he won in 2004, we got to wrestle a little bit and hang out a little bit. So,
dang. So when you went out there on that recruiting trip, had he won anything yet?
Yeah, he had just won his second title.
Second title. Okay. Yeah. So what was he like back then?
Oh, he was like he is now, very quiet, very he knew what he wanted, and there wasn't much going to stop him from getting it. We played a lot of video games at the time. I forget what video game it was. GoldenEye.
Oh yeah.
So I was really good at GoldenEye, and so was he. So him and I spent a few hours seeing. I think I beat him a couple times. He beat me a couple times.
So Cael played GoldenEye.
Yeah.
Wow. Coach Douglas, I've heard that he is just an intimidating cat, and I've had him on the podcast. But as a coach back in the heyday, yeah, he was all business. What was your experience like with him?
He was awesome. My parents loved him. I loved him. He actually visited twice. He came up on a home visit, and then I went down to Iowa State on my visit. And then it was a few days before the early signing, and I'm sitting in math class, and I get called over the loudspeaker to come down to the athletic department, and sitting in there was Coach Douglas. And he said, I wanted to come up, and I know this is a tough time. I want you to know that you're the guy we want, and show me around your high school. And I got to spend a half a day with Coach Douglas around my high school. It's pretty cool.
How split were you on going to Iowa State over Lehigh?
It was tough. It was between those two. Oklahoma. So my visits were Iowa State. My official ones were Iowa State, West Virginia, because I was close with Greg Jones, and we were close in weight and training partners. So WVU, Lehigh, Penn State, and I think that was it. I went to Pitt on an unofficial since I lived so close. So, but it came down to it. I mean, your phone at that time, the house phone was blowing up, and I knew what my parents wanted me to do. I said, I'm going to sleep on it, wake up in the morning, we'll have an answer, and I did.
They wanted you to stay close?
Yeah, close with the education and being close. So my parents didn't miss a match. We wrestled once in Hawaii, and I can maybe talk about that later. But my parents and one other parent, the Dillons, Brad Dillon's parents, were the two parents that flew out for that match. But they were excited. I was excited. You can't say Lehigh was doing what Penn State's doing right now. Not many teams, well, no one can actually. But at the time, Lee had signed John Trench, Mike Pirazzolla. They had a really great class. So when I signed, Derek Zink had already committed, Travis Frick had already committed. So I was going into a room that had, 3, 4, 5 All-Americans returning.
Yeah, that Lehigh room must have been filthy back in the day. I mean, the number of names on that roster was crazy.
Yeah, I think at one point in that room there were 8 All-Americans in the lineup with Mario Stewart and Cooperman, Dylan Frick, myself, obviously Zink, Trench. There's 7 right there. I mean, it was a very competitive. Oh, and then Robbie Roan, a national champ at 184.
And didn't your 125 pounder All-American after being unseated, or am I thinking of someone else?
No, that would have been Stu. Well, I don't know. Maybe Stu was unseated, and he upset a few guys with the mixer.
Okay.
And ended up having Abbas, I think, in the semis, which is a tough draw.
Tough draw. It's funny. Our Abbas, we just did an interview with Stephen Abbas, and it's going live today. So that's ironic.
Oh,
but
nice.
He's that's about as tough as draws you can get back in that day.
Yeah.
Except for maybe Cael, obviously. But it's funny because I don't think I've ever had someone from the East Coast on this podcast that when I say what schools were you considering, everyone says Lehigh. Like, it's just like everyone on the East Coast looks at Lehigh.
It's a great school. There's a lot of support. The alumni support is the second to none, in my opinion. So being successful there as an athlete, being successful there as a student athlete, as soon as before you're graduating, you're already figuring out where you want to go work, who you're going to work for. The alumni support is unbelievable.
Now, it's not officially an Ivy League school, but I kind of put it in that box because, and maybe it is, but if it's not, I kind of put it in that box because back then I read an interview that Strobel had done that you guys, like, for example, you couldn't practice during finals. You didn't do like national letter of intent. Like, so it's a big academic focus, it sounds like.
Yeah. So we wrestle all the Ivy League schools. At one time they did petition to get into the Ivy League, and Ivy League, very tight-knit organization, didn't let the Bucknells, the Lehighs, the ones that were close right there. Mm-hmm. So we wrestled all in the same conference, the IWA, but it's a private school, small private school. I think there's around 5,000, maybe 6,000 undergraduate students, and it's very well known for its academics.
Yeah, no, definitely. It's interesting. You almost went to West Virginia because of Greg Jones, and man, Greg Jones, absolute killer. I mean, unbelievable. Yeah. So, man, so you and folks who are younger, maybe you don't know this, but you were one of the top high school recruits in the country when you were coming out, number 1 at your weight class. So, definitely a big name recruit across the board. And so when you announced you were going to Lehigh, did you have like other coaches still calling to get at you, or back then once you announced it was kind of done?
Once I announced it was kind of done. There were some very tough ones because I was close with Robbie Waller. He was at Oklahoma, and I went out to visit him a few times because I trained at All-American my whole life. So
what's that? I'm not familiar with that.
Rob Waller's All-American Wrestling Club. Coach Waller's been, I think he's just announced his 50th year coaching. So he's, I think, 72 right now, maybe 73, but he's still at all the tournaments and has a really great club. But that's where I trained with Robbie. So Robbie had went to Oklahoma. He was 2 years ahead of me. And the year I took second at the Nationals my freshman year, Robbie won it at 174. I was at 165. I took second. But Oklahoma was close because I was close with Robbie. So that was a hard one because I became close with Coach Spates, and I got to meet with Michael Leitner and that whole team, Byron Tucker. So that was a tough phone call. He called afterwards to basically say good luck to you, but it was a tough one. They were all tough. I mean, when you get to know those coaches and yeah, it's tough.
So you were just as close to going to OU as maybe you were Iowa State, it sounds like.
It was very confusing.
Wow.
It was.
And, I'm 33 now, and I dread making a tough sales phone call. I'm in sales. When you're 17, having to take a call when you know you're going to deliver bad news, there's truly nothing worse.
No, it was very difficult for me to do, and that's one of the worst things I'm at is telling them no. I'm usually a yes guy, but that was bad. But once I got past that point, it was all Lehigh. I was talking to Tommy Roan and Zink and Frick on a daily basis about getting out there and training. And Chris Vitale, who was a returning senior at 165, had just taken, I think, fifth, was coming in ranked third. So I couldn't wait to get up in the room and start wrestling.
And what was Coach Strobel like? Rest in peace, of course. What was he like back in those days?
Coach was great. Coach was a father figure to all of us. He taught me how to fly fish. Recruiting wise, a lot of people don't know this, but Scott Hovan from Parkland, I think he's a principal there now, but he was a two-time All-American for Pitt, I believe, two-time state champ. He was the recruiter for Lehigh back then. He rounded all of us up. So when I say all of us, said Trench, Pirazzolla, Zink, myself, Tommy Roan, that whole group with Coach Strobel and Coach Hovan and Santoro, of course. Hovan was the sales guy. He was the guy that he had Zink on the phone saying, hey, I have Zink on the other line. He just committed. Frick's on the phone waiting to hear from you. And he was that. He was he was a very good recruiter. Coach Strobel was more of, like I said, a father figure to all of us.
And how did you work out the situation where you didn't wrestle your first year?
Well, so when I got up there, it was a really strong lineup. And at first, I wrestled 160 my senior year. And I thought maybe I could make 57. And I talked with the coaches a little bit about it, because you had Pirazzolla at 49. 57 was kind of an open weight. Some tough guys in there, but 65, number 3 ranked Vitale. So the first month or so, I tried to see if I could make the cut to 57. And I didn't weight train much in high school, but it was just pull-ups and running and that kind of stuff. Once I hit the weights and got in the weight room, I realized 65 or 57 was not going to happen, and it was a no-brainer for me to redshirt that year.
Because you were when I see the videos, I watched the Tyrone Lewis match. You were a big 165 pounder.
Yeah, I would make my descent starting in August. I was at like 190, 192, and I'd start in early August to make my descent down to 65. And I would keep it. I'd like to keep it around 172. If I was at 175, I felt heavy. So.
And what would you be? What was your diet consisting of to stay like that?
Oh, just good protein. After matches, obviously a lot of water, Pedialyte, just healthy eating and getting on the mat, working out. We were mat rats up there. So as much as we can get on the mat, we were on the mat.
Because when I think about Lehigh during that era, I think MTV, Corey Cooperman, I think craziness, and I couldn't find it for the life of me. But one of the Lehigh articles had mentioned that you and Cooperman were mentioned in a Sports Illustrated deal on like cutting weight, and I could not find the Sports Illustrated article, so I was dying to ask you about it. What do you remember about like if that article happened and like MTV being around for all the weight cutting back then?
That was a crazy year, because we had Sports Illustrated doing an article on myself, and we had MTV doing that whole series on Cooperman. At the same time, they were filming that documentary that was supposed to be about this little engine that could, Lehigh, coming in ranked second, could possibly win a national title behind Oklahoma State. And it ended up actually, they turned it into more about John Trench's eye story than the story about Lehigh. But you had all these cameras in the room, and I think Coach Strobel right away realized it was a big distraction. But the true story, it was, I had the magazine. My wife just waved. She could probably get it for me. They had it just about us cutting weight, and the same thing with the Cooperman and MTV thing. It was all about cutting weight. So, but the big thing was the distraction in the room. It was too many cameras. Plus, you had the local cameras in there and news guys in there, and Coach kind of put a nix to it, right away, and got us away from it as quickly.
How did he shut down the MTV thing? Because that seems pretty formidable.
Well, out of the room, so they weren't in the room much. So they were more in our apartment, or they would come to the dining hall and ask us questions there. So a lot of the footage from the MTV clip, you'll see we were sitting on the couch, and we were at my apartment, and I was sitting next to Zink's now wife, Lindsay Mantella, Rocky Mantella's sister. And my wife and her friends were back at home and saw the video and said, hey, I was just dating her at the time. Troy's sitting next to this blonde girl, and I get the phone call from my wife, like, who were you sitting next to? And I'm like, that was Lindsay.
Oh my God. And so it's literally like cameras are just following you around at your apartment. I mean, in a college apartment, it's small. It's like you're in there with these like camera people. It's so crazy to think about.
Yeah, it was them, and then, like I said, that documentary follows for that whole year. They traveled with us.
Who shot that? Who has all that footage?
It was two guys from Australia. I don't know who has the footage. I know some of the alumni backed it and paid for it, but a guy to probably reach out about that would be John Trench, because that year, I ended up getting upset by Mark Perry and taking third, and Trench, I believe, was upset by Damian Hahn, maybe.
Yeah.
So the things just didn't come out like we were hoping it would. So they kind of changed the storyline to talk about, the retina and the goggles and that whole deal.
So did they ever make a feature film out of it?
Yeah, they did. There's a small documentary about it. So
wow, I need to get my hands on that and watch it.
Yeah, I'll see if I can find it and I'll shoot it over to you.
And if nothing else, like like for a film like that, I can't imagine how much they didn't use. So all of the stuff they didn't use, like you could make, like just knowing that's out there is exciting. Like I'm sure there's some stuff on that you could do with that,
Absolutely.
Wow. That's a lot, because I mean, you nailed it, man. And I didn't know this. Lehigh was number 2 in the country your junior year coming into the season. Yeah. You guys were, and you had gotten a third, or the team had gotten a third, team had gotten a fourth. So like now we think about Cornell, no big deal if they're in the top 4, but during your era, it was you guys right up there all the time in that top 4 team race.
Yeah. So that's why I was saying earlier about us. We're not doing, but Penn State did, but Penn State at the time wasn't keeping all the Pennsylvania wrestlers in-house, and Lehigh was starting to do that, which we were competing, with the Big Ten schools. I mean, I remember we went on a road trip, had Iowa State. We split matches. We beat Iowa State, lost to Iowa, but we beat Michigan. We had a really, really formidable team.
And you had Okie State on the schedule when they were going through their heyday.
Yeah, they had that run where they won 5 in a row. The one year had 5 champs out of 10 weight classes. So we had one match at Grace, or not at Grace, but up at the big arena, and I forget the attendance. It was packed, sold out, and the matches were myself and Johnny Hendricks, Trench versus Ross Holt. I don't know if Dylan wrestled Pendleton that match or not, but every match was Frischkorn versus Cooperman. Every match was a really tough match.
And you battled Okie State, it seems like a lot of your career. You had Tyrone Lewis, and what a legend he is. And so your senior year, you wrestle Hendricks in that duel. Is it true that after you beat him, he said that he's going to take you out? Is that true?
Hendricks talks a lot during matches. Not a lot, but in situations where like he'll run you out of bounds, he'll whisper something just to get your head, and then you come back to the center and you're pissed, and then it happens again. So during a break, a few times he had just whispered stuff, just nothing crazy. But after the match, we were kind of in each other's face, and I kept saying, "That's number 2. That's number 2," because I beat him earlier in the year at the national duels, or the Virginia Beach duels, one of the two. And I said, "That's number 2." And he said to me, "I'll see you in the finals." And sure enough, he made it and I didn't.
That guy is such an enigma. I mean, I've never been able to so much as brush contact with getting him on the podcast. And a lot of the guys he went to school with, you don't hear much about him, but man, dude was a killer. And
one of the strongest wrestlers I've ever wrestled.
Really?
So Derek Zink is one of them. Hendricks is, to score on a takedown on him, I had to give everything for a minute to get to his legs and get the 2 points. It was very difficult to score on that guy.
And to have that kind of confidence where you just got beat twice and you still think you're going to win is very rare.
Yeah. He was smiling afterwards and pointing at
You're almost crazy, dude. Like, get a grip,
Yeah.
Wow. And And, again, Oklahoma State, I think Tyrone Lewis. So you beat him in the finals your sophomore year. Was it your sophomore year?
Yeah,
Or, yeah,
I
sophomore year.
I
Didn't you
beat him
wrestle him in
in
the duel in the freshman year too, right?
I beat him in the semifinals my freshman year.
That's right.
And
Okay.
that
But
it was a crazy back and forth match, and at the very end, he tried to inside trip me, and he was in bad position. I was up 8-7, and I think there was like maybe 25 seconds on the clock, and he went for an inside trip out of an over and under, and I stepped over top, and he just fell to his back, and I won that one. And I remember Tyrone when he was a freshman at 174. I was watching him wrestle with a couple of my high school teammates, saying that's our favorite wrestler. That guy's so explosive. And then 2 years later, I'm wrestling him in the semifinals of the nationals. But
at 165.
at 165, he had cut down. So
What?
yeah.
God.
So
I'll
and then
never
he beat me in a duel.
That's what I was thinking. So the duel, because you had like a 34 match streak going on, or like maybe it was a duel streak. Bottom line, like you wrestle him, it must have been maybe at Stillwater, maybe it was at Lehigh if it was your sophomore year.
I lost 2 duel meets in college, both in Stillwater.
Both in Stillwater.
Yeah.
Both to who was the other one to?
Lewis first and Hendricks.
Oh, you lost to Hendricks. Wow, I didn't know that. Wow.
Yeah.
Those were tough weights. It's funny because as a middle schooler, I was like in maybe my freshman year in high school, or maybe 8th grade, when Oklahoma State really started to win, and I was obsessed with John Smith. But I'll never, ever, ever forget this glimpse of Tyrone Lewis running off the mat crying. Like, I'll never forget it. It was like so ingrained in me. And sure enough, this morning I'm watching your match. That was the match where that happened. Because he was he a 4-time finalist or
4-time semifinalist, I think.
Okay.
And then one time, the one time he made it to one time in the finals. So he lost to, and there were some tough guys. I don't know if it was Lackey one year, Heskett the other year, but there were some tough weight classes.
Twice,
yeah. But
yeah. And that crab ride you threw on him, it was out of hand early, and it kind of stayed 5-1. And every time I Google your name, I see scrambling, I see crab ride. I'm dying to ask you about this. Like, how were you thinking about and breaking down the crab ride back then? Did you have a system for it, or were you mainly feeling it?
So no, I was always comfortable on top. Junior high school, top game was kind of my game, but I was more of like a cross-face cradle, bundle, tilt type wrestler. But I was comfortable throwing legs in, very comfortable. When I got to Lehigh, Santoro had just hung up his shoes, so he was still in competition shape in my size. So we started playing and wrestling around, and the more I tried to hold him down, the more I realized I'm not going to be able to cross-face cradle Pat Santoro. I started throwing legs in, then he'd sit me to the butt to try to do a leg slip on me, and that's where that series kind of developed from. And then I got to the point where I was confident enough. I was doing it in the room all the time. And then in a match, I started doing it in a match. And I realized right away, wrestlers were really uncomfortable there. Mm-hmm. So I thought if I could put a wrestler in a position where he's uncomfortable, he's going to make mistakes. I can counter on those mistakes and score. So that's where I would try to put everyone in that position.
And is this like parallel universe? Jesse Jansen's doing something similar, or he already come through? Like, where was that evolution at?
It's funny you say that, because Jesse Jansen and I wrestled twice in the same tournament. It was like not a Mason-Dixon tournament. He was a senior, I was a junior, and I didn't know who he was at the time. I remember my coaches coming up to me before the first match. I said, "Hey, this guy's a 5-time New York State champ," and I was like, "All right." I was coming off a PA state title, and they said he's really good on top. So I was up, I think 6-4. He picks top in the third period, turns me twice. So
whoa, that's confidence.
Yeah, and just a freak on top but he was different. I stayed on the shoulder where he went all the way to the claw on the crab ride, but still got the points. But we wrestled in a match, maybe 4 hours later, Team PA versus Team New York. Same scenario. I'm winning. He picks top, and I reversed him and pinned him. So we went 1-1.
That is epic, man. And when you got into college, would you still start by putting the leg in and having the guy defend like that, or would you just get to the position?
I would try to get to it. So I would try to run the guys where they would feel like if they rolled all the way through, they were in a better position, and that's where I would catch them. So I would try to run them to one side where they think if I just kind of hip change over, I'm going to get back to my base and get to my stand. As soon as they go for the hip change, that's when you kind of, well, obviously there's technique to it, but that's where you would catch them and get a quick 2 count or even hold them there and get your fall.
Isn't it crazy how wrestling goes through evolutions of technique? And like right now, with Spencer getting done, tilts are crazy, but the crab ride in that, it's kind of like a half, I mean, kind of not really, but that was a very popular situation during that early to mid 2000s, it feels like.
Yeah. There was a lot of guys that were comfortable in there. And I think Jaggers was one of them from Ohio State, was comfortable in that position. Jansen, NCAA champ Harvard. So yeah, it was. And I'm waiting for it to come back. So.
Me too. Like, you don't see it. I was just going to say, like, I'm thinking about it. I'm like, I don't think I've seen that recently. And everything is in waves though. So you never know. It probably will come back, but
as this sport evolves, as it evolves every year, it gets more exciting. But I think we're going to see it because it is exciting to see that kind of stuff, because a lot of the fans that are maybe, fans that at the Nationals are saying who's scoring points here. So it's exciting for everyone to watch, and it's a dangerous position. So you don't know.
They're calling back points pretty quick these days.
Yeah. If I wish, man, I could get a 4 count. I mean, to get 4 points. I could
a
lot more points on the board.
Wow. So that all came from wrestling Santoro. And so were a lot of guys at Lehigh doing that deferred year of eligibility? Like, were you even a student at that year, or are you just kind of living out of your apartment doing your thing?
No, you could redshirt at Lehigh. It's not like
you could. Okay. Yes. Got it. Okay.
So I came in and we had a really, really good class. So Zink at 57, me at 65, and then Cooperman. So I was on a visit with Cooperman in Iowa State. I think it was him, Marcus Levasseur.
Wow.
Maybe Rosh Holt was in that mix, but it was a really good class where Bobby Douglas, if he could have snagged all of us at one time, would have went on a really good run. But Cooperman ended up at Minnesota. And then after first semester, the coaches, Santoro and Strobel, Coach Strobel brought me in and said, hey, we have a transfer coming in. He knows you, and he didn't know many of the guys on the other team. I said, who is it? And once he said his name, obviously it was a huge addition to our lineup, because Coop was a beast, 3-time All-American, and at a weight class where we needed him. So as he came on board, and we made him part of the team right away.
Yeah, I don't know why when I went to the Lehigh website, instead of just saying redshirt, it said deferred eligibility. So in my head, I'm like, maybe they don't allow that, but yeah, obviously they do. So that's kind of where I was getting at with that, but got it. So you just, straight up redshirted. And it's crazy you say Marcus Levasseur, because that's a name that, unless you're really in the trenches, maybe a lot of fans don't know that name, but he took out Ben Askren, and him and Cooperman went to Minnesota, and they both left after the first semester.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
So back then, on the Fargo circuit, or at the Vegas, over in Vegas, the weight classes were like 132, 143, 154, 165. So you had a bunch of guys jumbled up in one weight. So at one weight, it was like Marcus Levasseur, Ryan Bertine, Johnny Hendricks, and then the next weight it would be, a couple of those guys, myself, Ben Askren, and Nate Baker at the time was a 4-time Minnesota State champ, and he went to Minnesota, transferred out, and I think he won 4 titles Division II. But
was Mark Perry around, or was he too small?
He was younger. He was younger and probably smaller at the time. So no, not at that time. I saw Mark Perry when he was at Blair. Lehigh and Blair are very close to each other, so we would go there and train a lot. So I trained with Esposito, but then I didn't train with Mark Perry at all. But I watched him come up as a redshirt at Iowa. No one out of the gates, because I watched his style a little bit. And at the time, Chirella, my style matched up really well against Chirella's, and I had wrestled him a few times already. But I watched Perry's style just a little bit, knew it was going to be a fight, because he wrestled a lot like I did. He was flexible. He was good in positions where I was good.
Yeah. So when you're talking Vegas, are you talking Western Regionals?
Yeah, at the time it was the Western Region. So the U.S. Open was going on, and then the high school team or the high school guys.
Isn't it crazy that that was so loaded, but it wasn't like it was like junior nationals. It was just the Western regionals, but everyone went because the US Open was going on at the same time.
And you had all those college coaches there. So if you wanted to get a good look and you're wrestling on a mat. And I remember watching Kerry McCoy wrestle Stephen Neal, and then you see all those college coaches there. It was just, at that time, it was really great. So I went there, I think 3 times. I think I took third, and I think I won it twice. So
wow.
I beat Baker there, and then in the finals at Fargo, Baker beat me. So
that's a name I don't know, man. I always love hearing a new name because that's someone to get on. So Nolan Baker, you said?
Nate Baker.
Nate Baker. Okay.
Yeah, I think he was ranked first in the class of 2000, went to Minnesota, and I think transferred after either 1 year or 1 semester. And it's funny because my redshirt year at Lehigh, I enter the Midlands. I'm undefeated, enter the Midlands. I have first round match, maybe it was a pigtail, Nate Baker. And I'm like, I can't get this guy away from me. And he actually beat me. And I walked off the mat, and Santoro said to me, if you're going to wrestle like a high school kid, that's the results you're going to get. I ended up coming back and taking third. He didn't place, but I'll never forget Coach Santoro telling me that. And I did. I wrestled like a high school kid.
Wow. Keeping it real with you like that.
Yeah.
Wow. And think about it. If Minnesota still won after losing all those guys, how deep must they have been back then?
Yeah.
I mean, those are 3 of the top recruits in that era.
Yeah, for sure. Nate Baker was 1. Cooperman was 1.
Levasseur was
a beast. Yeah.
Oh my God. He's been on the show. He's unbelievable. I mean, and one of the coolest guys, but I mean, in the Ben Askren book, he talks about Levasseur putting it on him, and it's like, who's this guy? You know, and sure enough, Mr. Minnesota, just one of the most incredible high school careers of that era, for sure.
Yeah, so, I remember my senior year going into Fargo, I was ranked 1. I already committed to Lehigh, and we were all kind of warming up, and we saw that goofy hair running around, and I drew him first round, Ben Askren.
Yeah.
And I think I was up maybe 5-0 or 4-0, and he locked up a cradle, rolled me through a couple times, beat me 8-4, and Hendricks ended up winning that way, but it was Hendricks, him, all of us in the same weight. So.
And did anyone know about Askren other than like his hair and all that, or
not at the time. We were kind of like making fun of him, like I wasn't big on making fun of people, but yeah, that was the like, look at his hair, look, he has a boombox, and he's kind of goofy, and he just, when I I could take him down, I couldn't turn him. I could take him down, couldn't turn him, but he landed backwards. Like if you would take a shot on a typical person, you think he's supposed to land on his far right hip. Askren would land on his other hip, and it threw you out of whack. So he was the type of guy, because I wrestled him a year later in, I think the U.S. It was one of the not the U.S. Open, but one of the tournaments, and I beat him. But I figured him out. You have to explode through him, take him down, and then kind of don't go for scrambles.
Yeah. And
more like a touch and go.
So knowing that was the old pool system, so like if you would have had another tough dude next and happened to lose, you might have been out back then, right? In that old pool system at Fargo.
Yeah, I think I took 5th in that one. Coming in ranked, 1. I think I took 5th.
That's, I mean, it's still loaded, of course, but now there's a couple big tournaments and still one of them, but really back then that was the main one.
Yeah, that was the main one.
Wow. Sure. And the one thing, we're kind of jumping around, but that's okay. Your freshman year of high school, I noticed you just on the PIAA website, did you not place as a freshman?
No. So
what happened?
I won the Whitfields, which is our, the Whitfields is our regionals. And first round at states, I was 130. I was winning 8-0, third period, against a senior from Erie. And I shot in on a double leg. There was maybe 40 seconds left in the third. I was beating him up pretty good. Shot in a double leg. He locked a front headlock and lifted me up. And when he lifted me up, he screamed, he bit me. Referee just technical. I'm like, there's no mark on his arm. It was all in the papers. He even admitted he didn't bite me, but I got disqualified.
And then because of that, you can't wrestle back, right?
Well, yeah, because of that, you can't wrestle back, which made it even harder.
Whoa, that had to be such a controversy at the time. I mean,
Yeah.
that's bizarro. Wow.
Yeah.
I really didn't know the answer on what happened.
Yeah. So the referee got banned from the PIAA refereeing. And for a while, it was just all over the local news. They were coming into school and asking me what happened. And, it was a distraction for a little while. And then next year, I went up 3 weight classes. So it just kind of went away.
And were you projected to do well your freshman year, like top guy?
Yeah.
Or
He got beat in the semifinals in double overtime. And Mike
you're up 8-0
Pirazzolla,
on him.
8-0. Mike Pirazzolla took second. Connolly went to Navy. I think he was the #1 seed at the Nationals one year. Mark Connolly upset Mike Pirazzolla and won the state title that year. I'm pretty confident I would have been in the mix, though. I was having a really good year.
Wow. And so it kind of begs the question, phenomenal high school career, phenomenal college career. When did you turn the corner and kind of quote unquote get good, so to speak?
I'd say probably 7th grade going into 8th grade. I had bumped up a couple weight classes and obviously being the Whitfield, Greg Jones, the Hammer was the name that was just no one could beat him. And I remember we were at a match at North Hills, and North Hills was a big tournament, and I was at 100 pounds, and he was at 100 pounds. And a couple of the parents came up to my dad and said, well, Troy really grew and is looking good, but he's not in a league to wrestle Greg Jones. So my dad came down and told me that, and before I stepped on the mat, and said, hey, these guys don't think you're in the league to beat them. And I said, oh, we'll see. So I ended up beating them there. Then we wrestled in the PJW states in the semifinals. I beat him again there, and then lost in the finals in Rideout to one of the Moore brothers.
Oh, wow.
So if you fast forward, that's PJW. Fast forward, 4 or 5 years, all 3 of us are weighing in for the NCAA finals at different weight classes, but in the same bracket.
So Greg Jones had that kind of aura about him back then that there's just no chance. He was a legend.
Yeah. So I think I turned the corner after I beat him that match. I think people started to realize it. And I always wanted to be the best guy in the room, whether it was the high school room or wherever I was at. I wanted to be pound for pound the best guy in the room. So I really turned up training. I would run to school. I'd wrestle in the morning. Before school, my dad had built a wrestling facility in our basement. So Craig Nellis, the Nellis family come from Shaler. There's actually a lot of great wrestlers. The Perrys, the Perrys that were coaches at Navy, they were both 3-timers. The dad, Hugh, and I think Rex Perry, both 3-time NCAA champs. But the Nellis family is a big family that came out of Shaler. So Craig Nellis, I'd say 3 days a week, would drive to my house around 5, wrestle myself. I'd go shower. Then my brother, he would stay and wrestle him and then off to work, and did that from the time I was 5th or 6th grade all the way through high school. So
you're talking 5 a.m.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. That's next level. Wow.
My dad was serious about it. I mean, both my parents were very serious about it. I remember we'd be in bed, my brother and I, my dad would come home from work or wherever he was doing and say, did you guys do your pull-ups yet? Wake us up to do your pull-ups. And we'd say, no. He'd say, get in the basement. And it wasn't a regular pull-up bar. It was like a steam pipe that was like 8 inches round. And we'd have to do 50 pull-ups. So by the time I was in high school, I could do 50 pull-ups easy.
Straight
50 pull-ups. By the time I was in college, ask Coach Santoro. They were strapping 45-pound plates to me, and I was doing sets of 10, multiple sets.
Wow. So, and your dad owned a roofing company, right?
Yeah, my grandpap started it. He had 9 children, I believe, 4 boys, 5 girls. So all the boys either boxed, wrestled, and so he started the roofing company in like 1938. My dad and my 3 uncles worked there. My dad and my uncle Bob, who had passed, they had bought out the other brothers and then bought out my grandfather. So now my cousin runs it, and my brother Taylor runs roofing on the side. But yeah, really blue collar, Blue
I bring
collar.
it up because roofing, for anyone who knows, is one of the most vicious summer jobs there is to be on a roof. And I'm guessing that you got roped into a few job sites in your day.
Yeah, we did. So the last one I was on, we were on an A-frame house, which is a very steep slope, and we were stripping. Well, it was stone, so we were stripping this stone off the roof, and it's coming off in crumbles. Slate. It was slate actually,
Mm-hmm.
and I didn't feel comfortable, so I got off, got down, and my dad had a hoist there, but he thought I have Troy and Taylor. You guys can carry up the shingles. I don't need to the hoist, and that was for him a workout for us. But I got off the roof, and my dad said, "What are you doing? Get back up there." I said, "I don't feel comfortable up there." He said, "You have two options. You can either get up there and work, or you can run home." I said, "I'll run home." It was a couple miles, and I ran home in work boots.
Your dad's a tough cat, man. That's I can imagine when you get to Lehigh and you're on your own, like you already have that discipline instilled because you're growing up around that kind of a blue collar atmosphere.
Yeah,
And
yeah, it was.
is it true that when you were at Lehigh, you wouldn't let anyone give you a ride up this hill, like it's like a mile hill?
Yeah, so I thought, Lehigh's built on a mountain. So all the classes, all the dining halls are up on the hill. So there's stairs that go on for days. And every time someone would say, "Oh, hey, let's jump up and go for a ride for class," I'd say no. And I would think to myself, is Tyrone doing this? Is Johnny Hendricks doing this? But they're going to take a ride, and I'm going to walk up the stairs. So I'd walk up the stairs, and you know, thinking back to it, that attitude is kind of what took me to that level of competition early as a freshman.
Yeah.
So
And I'd read the press release once you were the head coach at Cleary, and you said attitude's a big part of it. So I was dying to ask you, like, what you meant by that, to have that kind of chip on your shoulder coming in as a freshman.
yeah, attitude and wanting to be the best guy, not just here, not just in this practice, but you want to be the best guy. We're going to go into another room, or we're going to go into a dual meet. You want to be the best guy on the map, pound for pound. The one everyone's saying, "Hey, watch out for that guy. Watch out for that guy." And that's kind of the attitude that was instilled in me, and I took that attitude with me to Lehigh. Our team, our freshman year, our redshirt sophomore year, that team was very competitive. I mean, if you were sitting on the bike, you felt bad about it, sitting on the bike.
Wow.
So
Did you guys still have the room that there is now where it's kind of in that, I can't even describe it really, but the current room at Lehigh, it's beautiful and it's kind of like a loft. Is that what you guys had, or was it something different?
no, so we were over in Taylor, we were in the Taylor gym. So the Crusoe complex wasn't built yet. So we were above the gym, second floor. It was a big room, but um, no, it wasn't like that one.
When you mentioned Mike Caruso, who's been on the podcast, absolute legend and just a business savage in his own right, they say that, from what I read, that, you win your title as a sophomore and people start mentioning Mike Caruso and you in the same breath. Was he a name that everyone just knew about back then at Lehigh?
Yeah, everyone knew, and Mike was a big part of the program all the time, a part of alumni relations, just a part of Lehigh. So, after the title, the first thing they say is he going to be the next Mike Caruso? Because Mike was the one that he won 3 titles. So
Yeah,
it came early and quick and strong with Lehigh alumni.
I bet. Yeah, no, it's that, like you said, the people that went there love it, and there's a lot of support for the program, and it had to be exciting, to be on that kind of a loaded team back then. And is it true that you pulled out of a tournament to have your 100th win at Lehigh?
Yeah, yeah. So Coach, that was on Coach Strobel wanted me to do that, but
That's
yeah, he
pretty
wanted me out
cool,
of the
though.
tournament. It was cool. So I ran out, wrestled a kid from Ryder, got the fall, and ran back into the locker room. And Coach came back and said, "Hey, put your straps back up." I said, "Why?" He said, "Just come on." And he and I both walked on the mat. Everyone was still standing, so it was a
Wow.
pretty great experience.
Wow. That's amazing. And you mentioned earlier that something about Hawaii. I want to go back to that you're, how'd you guys end up at a tournament in Hawaii or a dual meet in Hawaii?
Well, yeah, Coach, that's Coach Strobel's doing. That's him being the politician. So we were supposed to do a quad meet out there. It was going to be us, Oregon State, maybe Cal Poly, and Oregon at the time.
Mm-hmm.
But 3 of the teams had dropped out, and there was only one team that was still in it. I believe it was Oregon State. And Coach Strobel talked with athletic director, said, hey, we're still going. So it was probably December. We went out there, made weight. We were on the main island and made weight. They wanted to kind of introduce wrestling to the University of Hawaii at the time, but it was only one dual meet. Made weight. We're out there for a week, wrestled. I got into a quick scramble with this kid, pinned him in, I don't know, 15 seconds, and then had 5 days in Hawaii. And at the mainland where we were staying, our hotel, it was raining. My parents were staying on Kauai, which is just 20-minute plane ride. So I talked to my parents. They said, hey, you've got your plane, come over here. So I got to fish and hang out with my parents on Kauai for 5 days.
That had to be pretty
awesome.
sweet.
Yeah.
Kauai is beautiful.
Yeah.
Wow. So it's crazy how you went right into coaching too, because you were basically at Princeton after your career, an amazing career. You go to Princeton, and then next thing you know, you're at Penn State, and next thing you know, Cael gets there. So everyone wants to know, really your perspective, and you're one of the few people who can speak to it, you and Ansbach. What was the before and after? Like, what's the change that Cael brought in?
Well, Cael, one, he brought, when Cael came on board, he changed some things up as far as positions. He took Derlin out of the head assistant position, recruiting. Derlin was awesome at recruiting, but he moved him into the operation manager role, which at the time would allow me to be on the mat more. So because I was operation manager when I came in under Troy Sutherland, but I technically wasn't allowed in the practice room during practice. So he made some changes up like that. And then I remember him bringing the staff down, and we kind of wanted to go over, how, I don't want to give all the secrets away, but this is how we want our team to think. This is how we want them to train. These are the positions we're going to go over before we lift. We're on the mat drilling these positions. Before we run, we're on the mat drilling these positions, hand fighting positions, things like that. And then it was, bringing in the right type of guys. Bubba Jenkins, a friend of mine, was obviously on that team, and just wasn't the right fit. We tried to rope him in, and it didn't happen. So Cael knew that if it took a year to get the right people in there, the right athletes in there, then it's going to take him a year to do it. So he made some sacrifices that first year, for sure, to get into the right guys. And then all of a sudden you have guys, Frankie Molinaro's in there, but David Taylor comes in, Eddie Ruth is in there, Quentin Wright was in there. So it's, I remember after those, first couple of years when I was leaving to go to Clarion, Cael was like, hey, him and I got into the sauna and we're kind of talking. He's like, stay here. We're going to keep doing this. And this is right after we won the first national title in 2011. So we won the Big Tens. I think we took, in 2010, his first year, I think we took 7th. And then the next year we won it. Won the Big Tens, won the nationals. And he said, we're going to keep doing this. Stay here. And I was young. I was 27 or 28 years old. I love State College. That's all I can say. Love State College.
So did you ever notice any self-doubt or lack of confidence in Cael coming in and building that? Or was he someone who just carried that confidence with him at all times?
He carried it with him at all times. And sometimes he let it not in front of anyone else except in the team or just the coaching staff. If our guys went out and performed and lost, that was okay. But if our guys went out and didn't perform and didn't wrestle their heart out, and I remember one particular match against Iowa, we got beat. Quentin Wright got majored by the guy he pins in the nationals in the semis and wins the national title. But he got majored that duel, and it wasn't the fact that we lost the duel. It was the fact that our wrestlers didn't go out with the kind of heart that Cael demands and the kind of attitude Cael demands of his wrestlers is, leave it all on the mat and have fun. And, our first year when we won that second year when we won the title in 2011, our team saying on our rings that we have is yes, just that, yes, one word. And he said, just every time we bring it in, he said, just, yeah, we can do it. Yes, we're going to do it. And that's the way Cael is. So if we didn't perform and we got beat, you could see a side of Cael that was what really bothered him. But if the guys wrestles their heart out and they do the best they can, you know, he's a great coach and he's a great mentor.
No, I can't even imagine. And when you look at all the things you associate with Cael, you said this in an interview like 15 years ago that Flo had, that and I don't really think about Cael like this, but one of the things you said was that it's about fighting for 7 minutes, which to me, you see that, you think Tom Brands, you think Terry Brands, you don't think Cael Sanderson necessarily. But of course, he's wrestling all 7 minutes, but the fighting aspect was big for him in the sense of just giving it your all for those 7 minutes.
Yeah, 7 minutes of wrestling, whistle to whistle, line to line. And I can tell you firsthand, that's how Cael wrestled. I wrestled with him even when we were in the room. And this is when he was starting to come back. He wrestled Herbert those couple times. And
it's so crazy. I forgot you were there for that. I'm so glad you brought that up.
It was hard to even drill with Cael. I got so tired because he play wrestles the whole time. So as long as you shake hands, and some people warm up, and he goes right into kind of wrestling. And to keep that kind of pace, even after your 15-minute warm up, your body's drained because you don't have a second that he's not at least thinking about the next move. So you wrestled the whole entire time, whistle to whistle, line to line.
Wow. And
or the way getting scored on.
And the way he does it, like the way he's pushing and then moving the head, is an exhausting way to kind of react the whole time.
Yeah, because you're always, your head's down, so your weight's on your toes. And as soon as you try to pull your head up, your weight's on your heels, and all of a sudden he's on your heel. And then it's now you're defending an ankle pick, and it's just nonstop wrestling like that. And that was part of what I told you earlier, before warm-ups, before lifting. It was a little series that we went over with our whole team. Our whole team didn't have to win because we had the Altons on our team. We had some guys that were very explosive, like Frank Molinaro. So not everyone could wrestle that way, but they could hand fight that way. They could wrestle throughout every position. So it was. And
when you say wrestle that way, like what do you mean?
Wrestle like Cael, like wrestle with ankle picks, but they could still hand fight the same way and get to their high crotch, or hand fight that way and get to their double legs. It was a matter of, wearing down your opponent, getting him out of position as he's trying to recover into his wrestling stance. You're already on his legs. So as you're beating on his head or you're controlling ties, they're going to fight back to get into position where they can just get into the wrestling stance again. On that transition is when you're already on their legs or you're attacking for their legs. So that's why Penn State was able to just come out. They could score so many points right at the get because that's what they're doing. They're getting you out of your stance, and you think you're just getting back in your wrestling stance, and they're on your ankle.
Mm-hmm.
So.
And it's interesting because that year, correct me if I'm wrong, it was not a shoo-in that you guys were going to win in 2011, or was it a shoo-in?
No, it wasn't. I mean, we were neck and neck with Iowa, and I think there was Ohio State maybe was up in that time. But yeah, it wasn't a shoo-in at all.
And even that tournament, like there was didn't Ed lose early on in that 2011 tournament? Like Eddie, it was, yeah.
He lost to the guy from Stanford, and Eddie. So what happened? Eddie had a knee that it wasn't bad, but it was locking up a little bit on him. So it would lock up every once in a while, and then he would get it to unlock. So he was in the semifinals against a
Muchastegui.
That's it.
Yeah.
So he was in the semis. Eddie was a freshman. Eddie was crushing everyone. And Eddie lost the first scramble, got taken down, but the guy from Stanford ended up with a bent leg Turk, and Eddie's other knee was locked up. So he turned him once, belly down, turned him once, belly down. Eddie's looking at us like, I can't do anything. We brought him to the corner. The doctors and Dan Monthly, the trainer, kept trying to get his leg out of it. Was locked. So it was locked bent. They were trying to get it to break, and it wouldn't. So they threw the towel. They threw the towel in, took him back, into the back, and the doctors and monthly went to work on him. So they actually pushed it further into lock, and then were able to pull it out. And then Eddie taped it up, and he wrecked his way to third place. The next year, wrestles the same guy in the finals, and I think beats him 8-0.
And if he doesn't come back, you guys don't win the team title, most likely.
Exactly. And then Quentin Wright at the same time, too. He got majored by the guy from Iowa 14-2, and then comes in and pins him in the semifinals and wins the title.
Now, is this the year Magic Man's wrestling Jenkins in the finals? Or is that the next year when all those guys came back or came out of redshirt?
No, that would have been that year, I believe.
That's a crazy story too, right? Because Jenkins is on the team, and then
it transfers out. David's a red shirt, and there was a lot of, everyone. David's the Magic Man, so everyone on the team knew that, hey, everyone's after the Magic Man, and there was a lot of attention given to that because, it was when Cael and Cody and Casey had left Iowa State and came to Penn State. David was now kind of like a free agent. So now he's taking another visit to Oklahoma State, and it wasn't a lock that he was coming to Penn State anymore. So we had to give, a lot of attention to that. And I think, some of the guys in the room might get mad at me for saying this, but there was a little jealousy there. Because I remember when David came to the room, and, it was one of our first practices during summer camps or something, Frank Molinaro just put it on him. I mean, crushed him. And David was a skinny little freshman, right out of high school, true freshman. And Frankie was, I think at the time, returning All-American and just a beast.
What a killer.
The Gorilla Hulk. And he just hammered him. I mean, hammered him. But the thing with David is David would come right back the next day and say, hey, let's go. And within 6 months, he was a different wrestler.
The hype around David Taylor as a college freshman was so exciting. I mean, it was insane to watch it from afar.
Yeah, well, from practice to seeing him compete, that's where the magic was, in my opinion. Practice, David really focused on improving, getting better positions, and he beat up on guys in the room, but not as bad as you would expect. And then, because like Kyler Sanderson was on the team that year.
He beat him in the wrestle-off.
Yeah, he beat him in the wrestle-off, then beat him at the Penn State Nittany Lion Open in the finals in overtime.
Imagine the pressure on Kyler that year. That's crazy. Go ahead, in the room?
But in the room, Kyler at the time could just blow through David and beat him up. But when David steps on the mat with a referee and a singlet and a whistle to whistle, he turns into a freak of nature. I've never seen it.
Wow. And think about on that team, you also have some of the guys you've mentioned, the Altons, Ed Ruth, and it's like to be around that must have been insane.
Yeah, it was really exciting, and Cael kept true to his word. We're going to keep doing is what he kept saying. And
bro, have they ever? Unbelievable. Yeah, it is exciting to have those guys in wrestling. And I mention this all the time, but I love that the movement Cael brings to wrestling is one of a little bit of lightheartedness, not taking it so serious, not being so just, intense all the time. I know they are intense, but you saw the Nationals interview. It's a game, right? He said that like back in 2010, I found an interview. He was talking about the same thing. It's like, that is good for wrestling to not be so uptight all the time with it.
Oh yeah. We had a lot of fun outside the room. I mean, and it was training exercises too. So, they would get together with other sports, other teams, and do, different kind of relay races. And then
really?
We kept the guys close to us. So we kept all the guys really kind of close knit to us. Whether it was, we'd play PlayStation together or, doing those types of things. But the most important part was if you're having fun, there's no one stopping you. So
I love it, man. Troy Letters, I should have booked more time because I'm 3 minutes late to a call, brother. I mean, you could talk wrestling for about 4 hours. So I'm going to have to get you back on because I'm just so many things we didn't even get to talk about, man. And it's been an absolute honor to have you on the show. I just want to say thank you for making time for us.
Thanks a lot. I really appreciate it.
Yes, sir. Have a good one.
You too.